Let's look at the latest decisions from the Supreme Court today. The Supreme Court always goes on a tear like this. It's just that these are some of the more controversial decisions. The reason why they are doing some of these more controversial decisions is because, and this is going to probably hurt your feelings to admit this or recognize this, but it's because they can. The fuck are you going to do about it? Huh? Are you going to riot? Are you going to revolt? Are you going to arm the fucking labor? Are you going to arm the working class? Are you going to rise up? No. Are the Democrats going to do anything about it? Of course not. That's it. There's literally there's no mechanism to even get the Democrats, which are supposed to be functionally on our side, to do the right thing in this circumstance. Let's start with the EPA ruling really quickly. Folks, what is currently happening in the United States of America is a super, super long, decades-long project, almost a century-long project in undermining federal power. Okay? Now, obviously, some nerds are going to say this is a bourgeois government and federal power was always on the side of capital owners regardless. And to them, I say, yes, you're right. Because the federal power, if it worked appropriately, would, in many instances, work in an anti-capitalist manner, would work against the profit margins, would work against the profit-seeking interests of corporations, right? What the Republican Party figured out as a successful way to genuinely just do whatever the fuck they want was to implement the age-old strategy that the conservatives in the South had implemented before, which is relegate all the brutality back to the states, okay? The state legislatures. However, the federal government had some tools in its tool belt against said actions. The EPA being one of them, for example. The EPA and other federal agencies are supposed to undermine corporate power at times when corporations will literally not do the right thing. And they're not expected to do the right thing because they are capitalist corporations, of course. These are lifeless institutions that only operate in at the behest of their profit margins and their shareholders. What the Supreme Court is doing in this circumstance, is playing its role in undermining federal agencies and undermining federal power, no matter how meaningless it ultimately is. Because the EPA regulation is already fucking way, way, way less than what it's supposed to be. Okay? The EPA regulation has routinely been eviscerated by prior governments. EPA is also, in many circumstances, and I know that there's some of you in here that actually work in the FDA, work in the EPA. You're brilliant young minds, and you have good hearts, and you have a good attitude, and you truly are probably doing a lot of great things wherever you can. Okay? But ultimately, you probably recognize that your bosses are already coming from those very same industries. The DuPont chemical Teflon debacle is like one of the greatest examples of this. Like a lot of the chemical agents that they use that are incredibly toxic for consumption weren't regulated by the EPA because they were the ones who fucking decided whether it was toxic or not. They were working alongside. They were in a collaborative effort with the EPA to figure out what kind of PFAS were actually, were truly toxic. You know what I mean? How are you going to let these fucking companies dictate what chemicals are actually the most damaging? They're, of course, going to stop. They're, of course, going to not reveal the truth. I grew up in Michigan in the town. Dow Chemical were pumping chemicals into the rivers upstream of Saginaw. We know what the world looked like before the EPA. Filthy. Los Angeles before the EPA. I mean, to be fair, like, low-key, like, the EPA, it's not like things are popping right now, you know what I mean? Okay, so for the record, so here it is. This is a good take. They're saying Congress has the right laws and you can't just delegate powers to agencies, right? It's nice that the Supreme Court said the EPA can only regulate carbon pollution in this way if Congress legislates it. First and foremost, that's not how the fucking federal agencies are supposed to work. But according to the U.S. Supreme Court, that is how the federal agencies are supposed to work. They can only fucking have power granted to them by Congress. Well, that is basically the only way to fucking destroy the power of federal agencies. Because as we all fucking know, Congress is not going to do shit. The entire Republican project hinges on sidestepping Congress, as I've said once again. The entire Republican project is about sidestepping Congress and congressional power and relegating all the authority back to states that can enact whatever fucking horrifying policy they want to with a carte blanche approach, okay? With the full knowledge that the Republican-packed courts and the Supreme Court can just solidify states' rights to do whatever the fuck they want. This is the goal. The goal is to sidestep the legislative branch and relegate everything back to the states. They are also probably going to take away federal courts and the powers that the federal courts have in individual states against state legislatures, okay? They're doing that. That's probably something that's going to come up in the next term. There's a North Carolina decision. Which, by the way, yeah, Nixon side the EPA creation shows you how bad it was. Like the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act is being used as like this incredibly intrusive thing. It's like, yeah, it's supposed to be, man. It's supposed to be. Congress already granted them power. SCOTUS is reversing legislation. No, they're saying that the interpretation of the Clean Air Act is a false one. That's what the main purpose of this is. They're basically stating that the Clean Air Act does not give the Environmental Protection Agency broad authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants that contribute to global warming. They're saying you just need to find another way to do it now. You need to pass new legislation to do it now. The decision, said environmental advocates and dissenting liberal justice, was a major step in the wrong direction, a gut punch, one prominent meteorologist said, at a time of increasing environmental damage attributable to climate change amid dire warnings about the future. The court's ruling could complicate the administration's plans to combat climate change. Its detailed proposal to regulate power plant emissions is expected by the end of the year. Though the decision was specific to the EPA, it was in line with the conservative majority's skepticism of the power of regulatory agencies, and it sent a message on possible future effects beyond climate change and air pollution. The decision put an exclamation point on a court term in which a conservative majority, bolstered by 3 appointees of former President Donald Trump, also overturned the nearly 50-year-old nationwide right to abortion, expanded gun rights, and issued major religious rights rulings, all over liberal dissents. They also said that the EPA can't set hard limits on things like CO2, which would stop new coal, and instead can only enforce efficiency standards. The only good thing that came out of this was that the only good decision that came out of today, the latest string of Supreme Court decisions, was that they admitted that they could reverse the Trump policy on the first. I always get the fucking legislation name wrong. God damn it. The one Remain in Mexico policy. They can actually, the federal government can reverse the prior administration's Remain in Mexico policy. But to recap the last 48 hours, Biden won't yet support gutting the filibuster to codify Roe, is skeptical about about using federal land in red states for abortion services, has ruled out court reform, and is reportedly set to nominate anti-abortion GOP lawyer for a federal judgeship. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I need you to understand that, like, Joe Brandon is not doing enough. He is not meeting what is necessary. But before we get to Biden's inaction, okay, first safe harbor, exactly, that's what I'm talking about. They gave that authority back to they said that the Brandon admin could actually can actually reverse that. Which, will they? I don't know. We'll see. EPA just also changed PFAS limits to basically zero. This case could basically say nah to the EPA and make them keep PFAS limits as is until Congress passes the PFAS Very Specific Limit Act or whatever. This Supreme Court case basically says all regulations have to go through Congress, aka lobbyists, every time who write bills making dollars just to do things that EPA scientists used to decide. Yeah. The filibuster reform thing he has gone back on, but it doesn't matter because Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin immediately said they would not, if I'm not mistaken, they said that they would not be in favor of changing the filibuster, which of course is perhaps a really solid approach. If you would like to, I don't know, find a stress point, and if you're, let's say, angry, and you want to direct that righteous anger towards people that are standing in the way of progress, this is why I always tell you, go after Democrats instead. Yell at Democrats. Yell at the National Democratic Party leadership for not whipping their caucuses effectively, and yell at the individuals that stand in the way of progress.
Because Congress isn't acting on these big issues, major questions, the court's word is the final word. I mean, Congress does have the ability to codify an abortion right, for example. Congress does have the ability to explicitly...
No, it doesn't. There is no ability. Congress will never be able to get anything passed. Shut the fuck up. Stop lying. You are a news broadcaster. Your job is to educate the public. What the fuck is wrong with you? This decision is exclusively about... This decision hinges on Congress's inability to pass legislation. That's the whole fucking point. That's why they can get away with it. I don't like it when people fucking refuse to recognize that. You're basically lying at that point.
We say the EPA can regulate on issues of climate change. It just hasn't acted.
That's the point. I mean, you know, that's a feature, not a bug. The reason conservatives and the Federalist Society want to limit the, want to push these doctrines is because they know that Congress is not going to be able to pass.
Whip it out, Toobin. Whip it out, dude. Whip it out and put it on the fucking table, Jeffrey. Thank God.
These laws. So when the court says...
Whip it out, King, and crank a hot load, dude. Put it directly on the table right now, motherfucker.
It's up to Congress to address climate change.
They know.
What they are really saying is we don't want climate change addressed because we know that Congress is not going to address it. So, I mean, that's what's really going on here. And that's the real significance of these opinions
in this moment,
and especially when it comes to the climate, because, the climate is an international crisis. And when the court says the only agency...
With regards to Jeffrey Toobin, you do not have to hand it to him. He will take it out himself. Oh, he for sure will.
That has the expertise and ability to address climate change can't do it. It means that it will not be done